Hi there and welcome back to the series on rooms. So this is in relation to should you buy, should you share or should you rent? Now again, regardless of where you are in private practice, this will apply to you because even if you're well established, you might be looking to relocate at some point, downsize or change or whatever. So it applies to all doctors across the board. So let's firstly look at buy. Well, gone are the days where people had all the money to buy property. So a property in Camberwell, a doctor actually said this to me the other night. A few years ago, you might have been able to buy a property in Camberwell for $1 million. Now you'd be lucky if you get a decent one for $3 million. So the cost of that has certainly gone up. So I guess what I say to you is, just remember who your avatar is, as in it's your patients and it's also your referrers. They don't know whether you own it or whether you rent it. And as long as it looks great and it's appealing to that avatar, your practice will thrive there. So don't get caught in thinking that you have to have these luxurious, glamorous rooms and whatever to be a success in private practice. Sometimes what you do by buying expensive rooms is you do your dough and then you've got no money to actually support your practice. So you're sitting there, but you've got no money to spend on marketing, so nobody's coming. So what would be the point of that? So don't get caught into that trap. If you do happen to buy, make sure it's a good capital investment. Go and see your accountants and make sure of that. Have a look at the data over many years of how the property has grown. And can you change it back to a residential, which might have better growth than a commercial facility? They're the things to consider if buying. If you're really sold on that it has to be mine, then you can go down that track and you might need to look further where your budget can afford. In some of the outer areas, of course, the cost can be a lot lower, so you may still be able to have the budget to have your own rooms and so forth. But what if you're deciding to rent? So over the years that we've been doing this, we've worked with many lawyers and looked at many agreements. So whilst we're not lawyers, we do know that these are the top things that we seem to see doctors have issues with. So I want to point them out to you. So firstly, I'd say to you, always get your lawyer to check it. It's a lot of money to go into not to have a lawyer to check over a document. If it's a document between colleagues, then there needs to at least be something in place, whether it's a memorandum of understanding or so forth, if you're sharing a room within the suites. Not as important then maybe to get a lawyer to check it, but you have to have some sort of agreement in place. But it's never a bad idea to get a lawyer to check it. It's always good food for thought. In relation to a lease agreement, what we see often doctors get into hot water over is make good clauses. So a make good clause will say, you have to return to the suites to exactly how it was. Now, it might be that the suites were in a ridiculous, dirty scenario before you started, but your landlord might still insist that you put it back. So make sure that you've taken photos of it and make sure you're clear on the quality and so forth. So I can think of an example at a particular plastic surgeon's room where a quirky landlord, we took down daggy old, blinds and so forth and drapes and wrapped them and put them in boxes under the house because the make a good clause was there and we would have to return them at the end. So at the end he argued, the curtains are damaged and these were $30,000 curtains, and trying his luck to get money out of the plastic surgeon who he saw as a gold mine. But we had photos, so we could see that you could see that they were decrepit old blinds that we put back up. But again, be aware of it. Make good clauses can give you some grief. It might be that you want your lawyer to argue that you can leave it as it is when you vacate, how you renovate it. Think about subletting too. Are you allowed to sublet? So for example, you might be an orthopaedic surgeon, and are you able to sublet to physios? Now, often the agreements will say that you can sublet, but sometimes they'll have conditions and they'll say, I need to see all your financials and all the, person who's letting from you, I need to see all their financials. Now, most doctors I know do not want to come forward with all their financials for something like that, so you give yourself a difficulty. So just check, are you able to sublet, and is it an easy process if you do? Don't be shy about talking about a rent-free period. Before you sign a lease agreement, remember that you're in the best seat, you're in the box seat. So you can, for example, argue and negotiate, may I have a 6-month rent-free period? This fit out, it's way more expensive than I thought it was going to be. So why don't I have this 6-month period, and that will help me and I'll be more likely to sign for a longer lease. You may as well try What's the worst that's going to happen is that they say no. Sometimes doctors find it better to have a third party involved to do that negotiation, the kind of bit of a good cop, bad cop scenario, if you like, but you may as well ask. I've seen, we've achieved it for a lot of doctors, and I've seen doctors get it on their own as well, if they're prepared to ask. Think about Owners Corp too. So Owners Corp used to be called Body Corp. You might be used to it being called that. We've seen some weird and wonderful leases that have had strange regulations for you to take on as part of the Owners Corp. So for example, we had one lease where the outside windows all had to be replaced by a tenant that was internal, it hardly even had an outside window. Things like that could be very expensive. So just, again, get your lawyer to look into it, and there's some things that I would definitely pick up and talk about. They're the main things that I think I can talk about in relation to renting and rental agreements. So now let's move on to the last consideration, should you share rooms? We talked about the 6 core needs right at the start of this, and one of the core needs was certainty. So sometimes doctors like to be very certain. Let's go into a brand that already exists. Let's go into a situation that's already staffed. It seems the easy way to go. It can work, but it can also be a disaster because the 6 of you that are in the group, or the 10 or the 2 or whatever group you go into, might have very different values and very different goals as to what the private practice is going to do. So what we often see is doctors that go in to share, they end up losing their identity, and as I said in one of the earlier videos, become a ghostwriter. So it means that they have no identity with the patients. They're not really developing their own patient database, even though they are their patients. The other thing is, so make sure you have that identity, and make sure that if something goes wrong, you can remove yourself very simply. So you've got your own documentation and so forth, that you know how your processes work within the actual practice as well. So you're not completely beholden to the practice. Know when it's not working and make a change. Doctors will sometimes let 5 years go by being very unhappy in a situation. If you start out and you've got your own identity, so even if you're on their website, but we set up your own website for you as well. If you've got access to your own patient database, that you can take that, which you're entitled to do under the terms of your agreement. If you can do those sorts of things, then it makes it a lot easier as you go along. What we do see a lot is doctors worrying a lot about, I don't want to upset any apple carts, I want to move on and so forth. So plan for this happening before you go into the actual suites or go into the share arrangement. And as I said, a lot of share arrangements work really, really well, but do you have the same values? Do you have the same kind of core needs? I had dinner with a doctor the other night and we were talking about this, and this particular doctor, he has a high need for contribution. And the doctor he was taking on as potentially an associate in the rooms, this associate said to him, I want A, B and C and whatever. And I said, what do you think that this doctor is compelled by? What core needs? And the doctor said, well, definitely growth and I'd say significance. So I said, well, do you think it's the right fit for you then, for what your mantra is? Now, it could be that they can coexist and that wouldn't be a problem. But if you're sort of going under the same canopy and the same kind of vision for the rooms, then it very well could be a problem. So, know your facts. Make sure you're not signing anything that's kind of signing your patients away, or you're signing your rights to what is yours when you move on. Make sure you're making a good relationships with your GPs as well. You have to be careful with this, and again, I'd get legal advice. If you've signed some hefty associateship agreement or some sort of franchise agreement, get your lawyer to look at it to make sure before you go into it, how would you exit this arrangement if it's not working? Because sometimes it is working, it's just that you want to change and you want to move on and your practice changes and grows too. So think about that from that point of view. So I hope that this video on buying, sharing or potentially renting has been helpful to you in this series. Again, as I always say, if you're a VPM, we're helping with these things anyway. If you're not a VPM client of RWS, then come and see me if you need some further help or assistance in these areas. And again, thanks for watching.